Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're going to be talking about sport and social media, something of a hot topic at the moment in the industry. And I'd like to just begin by introducing our expert panel. From my immediate left, Christophe Jaimes, who's head of sports and news partnerships at YouTube. François Vasseur, who's the marketing director of the French Football Federation. Gareth Capon, who's the chief executive of the Grabio platform. And William Field, who is the founder of the Prospero consultancy. I'm going to begin with a ridiculously simplistic question, just to get us moving and see which direction it takes. For sport, should sport be thinking of social? I'm thinking more in terms of short-form content here at the moment rather than live streaming. Should sport be looking at social media primarily as a marketing platform, something they have to invest in and use the logic of marketing? Or should social media be seen as an extension of the media rights portfolio in the same way that perhaps betting rights have become an extension of the media rights portfolio? William, could I start with you on that one?
Okay, I'd say the answer to your question is yes. In that social media certainly has the capacity to do a job in both respects. I mean, clearly at the moment, social media is better at reaching and engaging and making sport content more relevant to people. But I think most rights owners and brands recognise that there is a monetization route ahead. They can't tell you exactly how they'll get there or what's involved, but I think everybody expects there to be money as well as engagement. And we've already seen a few deals that reflect that.
I mean, Gareth, you were involved in a project yesterday which showed how this is basically taking off, social media taking off, and this is live streaming. Could you explain a little bit about that and the impact that had?
Sure. Last night in Vienna, ahead of the ATP tournament that's coming up there this week, there was a tiebreak tennis tournament. So it's a new tennis format, a little bit like sort of T20 for tennis, 10-point games, a 2.5-hour tournament with six of the players. And it was delivered on a number of broadcast channels, including Sky Sports and others around the world, but it was also using the Grabio platform. We streamed live on Facebook and then edited a number of clips for various platforms, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, during the event. And digitally it was a great success. So I think, look at the numbers this morning, nearly 750,000 people watched that event live on Facebook, and it was streamed to an audience, originally organic audience, of a page that had 2,000 likes. So to think that you've generated nearly 750,000 worth of audience distribution when you organically had 2,000 people that you're talking to shows the potential of social platforms for distribution. And when you have distribution and attention, then you have the opportunity for monetization too.
I mean, obviously that immediate reach and engagement is one of the key things that makes social platforms attractive. I mean, François, from the Federation's perspective, could you outline a little bit about how you first started to get into social, when you first started to use social platforms, what kind of content, and what the primary objective was when you began with social, whether it was about marketing, whether it was about engagement, whether it was about monetization?
Like a lot of people here, I think the French Football Federation story with social media is not so old. I mean, we first launched a Facebook page in 2011. It's only 5 years ago, and our primary objectives were marketing. First, were to tell stories without media. I mean, 5 years ago, when we wanted to have a relation with our fans, we have to talk to the media and not directly with them. After that, we had a data issue, for sure, and social media were the best way to create a great brand. I mean, with social media, the French Football Federation and the French team became a strong brand. Yeah. But now we have monetization issues, and we began to sell some rights with inside contents, or we even our broadcaster. That's a new story.
I mean, Christophe, obviously there's been sports content on YouTube, both live streaming and short-form content going back for a decade, maybe. What changes have you seen in terms of the type of sports content? Have there been any big shifts away from a certain type of content to another type of content?
Is this on? Yeah. Yeah, YouTube celebrated its 11th birthday, I think, in Q2 this year. So we had, I think the NBA is actually, so we have numbers for partners, like whenever you started. Now I think we're at like 8 digits. If you start a partnership with YouTube or start a channel, so you'd be like the 50 million channels there on YouTube. I think the NBA has a double-digit partnership number. So I think they started on the first 15 or within the first 20 of partners on the platform. So they've been there for quite a while. They would probably be better suited to answer that question, but there has been a change because they've been right there from the beginning and they've iterated quite heavily since. I'd say that just the fact that YouTube has grown as a platform so tremendously attracted a lot of different types of creators, right? So it's not necessarily the content for a given partner has changed much, even though it did for the NBA for sure. I'd say that over the while, people like the Free Kickers, most of you in the room wouldn't even know who they are. They're actually the biggest football channel on YouTube with almost 5 million subscribers. I mean, the fact that we have creators that build their complete business based on shoulder content around a sport, which has nothing to do with, in-match footage or any official content, proves that there is certainly there was a lot of content iteration on the way. And if you look at people like football clubs, I mean, they experimented a lot, and they still are, most of them, right, including federations and whatnot. They're experimenting with different content types. If you look at Chelsea Football Club or Arsenal, they started doing interviews because that's the only thing they could actually have, right? I mean, all the footage was taken by the league. So they started with interviews. They figured that it's really boring, right, to be honest. I mean, who wants to watch interviews? So they iterated from that, and then they saw that they can actually do a lot with training. Then live came along. I mean, scalable live. I'm not talking about the stuff that in the early days, but now you can live stream to millions of people for free on the internet. That wasn't possible 5-6 years ago. So some of the things they've experimented with came with technical innovation. VR is a typical other example, right? So you iterate not just because you see what fans like, you also iterate with the technology and what the technology actually allows for. So I think, yeah, there's lots of experimentation. There will be more, I'm pretty sure.
Gareth, I mean, you work with lots of different rights holders and content creators, producers. And a lot of that is increasingly live streaming, but a lot of it is also short-form content. Have you seen that as an area where there's been a lot of creativity? I mean, Christoph was talking about, things have been tried and tested and not really worked because they're not particularly interesting. Have you seen a burst of creativity as a consequence of people having to create short-form content which really engages fans?
Yes, I think so to an extent, but also we're sitting in a sports conference talking about sport, which has some of the best, most engaging short-form content on the planet, which is the highlights and the clips and the real-time videos around sporting events. So I don't think necessarily that you have to be, that there is a demand that everything has to be different. What we are seeing though is that the value of different types of content is changing and increasing. Our work with Wimbledon for the last 3 years, they obviously, as the federation, as the rights holder, they can't share the games. They're clearly owned by the broadcasters. But yet there is an opportunity to create engagement, new types of content distribution from the walk-ons to the games, the celebrations at the end of the games, different types of program behind the scenes or in the crowd, or David Beckham catching the ball in the audience he did last year. You can't plan for that, of course, but that shows you that there's an enormous amount of unexploited value in the rights which are already being created for television, which is the first area that you can go to, or as Christoph rightly says, there are people now creating different types of content specifically for digital and social platforms. And the key theme within that is that that the content is shareable, that you want somebody to engage with it, to watch it, but more importantly, to tell somebody else about it. And I think that's almost the common theme that we see through things that do really well on social platforms in particular, is that they have an element of shareability. It's a piece of content that someone wants someone else to view, and whether they do that directly because it's shared with a friend or someone else that they follow, or that I'm watching a piece of content and you follow me or we're friends and you see that I'm doing that. That's the inherent virality in these platforms, which is totally different to traditional distribution. There is nothing inherently viral about television in that traditional sense, even though the content is incredibly important.
I mean, William, to pick up on a point there about the fact that often social media is being created around a central proposition, which is might be a league selling or a federation selling. In terms of that core property, when it's, for example, clips for the Premier League or anything like that, when it's sold on social, are there, in your opinion, very few rights holders that can really use that as a route to direct monetization, to sell short-form clips directly to media companies, or alternatively, to sell content which is monetizable through, for example, a revenue share on YouTube? Is that something available only to the few, or do you see that really opening up to involve a lot more second and third tier sports bodies?
Well, it kind of begs the question about whether what they really want is monetization for that content. And I'm not sure that's how they start off thinking about it. I think they feel that, you know, and particularly when we talk about rights owners, you know, particularly if we take football, you know, we have a quite complex picture with many because, you know, you have the relationship between leagues and clubs, and there may be some content sharing there, particularly when it comes to clips and non-live. So there are often some tricky kind of boundary issues at stake here. And one would hope in most of those situations that there would be a kind of consensus on how to move this forward. I think most of the changes we're seeing are where rights owners are feeling that they can relax some of their restrictions from their primary monetizable properties, i.e. the live rights, to allow social use and short-form content to become a bit closer to the live window. And traditionally, you know, we've seen broadcasters who've wanted to say, or who've said, look, if I'm paying you all this money for the live rights, I've got to have everything. Don't even think about cutting and dicing this content if you want me to write this big check for you. And I think everybody is starting to realize that, you know, you can't disinvent or uninvent social media, and that you might as well you know, allow the properties that you invest in as a broadcaster to do well and to become popular and to engage people, whether you do that directly yourself, as broadcasters do, because broadcasters are big users of social media now to promote what they do, but I think they are probably slightly less resistant to other people doing it, you know, as long as it, you know, there's some strict rules around windowing than they perhaps were 2 years ago.
I mean, Francois, obviously the French national football team media rights for the qualifiers, for the Euros, are now sold centrally by UEFA. So you as a federation, what can you actually show? What kind of content can you put out there which is not part of that central package?
In fact, we have a lot of other contents. You know, inside contents, our fans love them. So we produce them and we broadcast them on our platforms. Sometimes, like I said, we can sell them, like we did last year with Lee TV for the Chinese market, for example. So that's for the national team. But after, we are a right holder, but we are a federation, so we provide services for grassroots footballers or things like that. So with social media, we have a lot of contents. We can provide them to play like professional and to live the match like professional. The other thing is the live broadcasting, and in fact, we produce the third division football, French football matches, and some grassroots matches. And it's maybe 400 matches per year. And if we don't monetize them directly, we have indirect revenues, like with sponsorship deals, for example. And our sponsors wants to become a sponsor of the broadcast of this type of event. So that's another way to monetize.
So those games that you show, which maybe are certain properties, for example, say some smaller cup games or grassroots games, which may not find a place on a traditional broadcaster, do you broadcast them, do you stream them on your own platform, or do you work with social media on those?
No, we work with social media platform. We work with Dailymotion. And, but we no, for example, but we work with YouTube too, and we have a lot of experimentation with Facebook Live. But sometimes it's not on our platform, it could be on our sponsors' platform. we made something interesting with Crédit Agricole, which is a famous French bank, which broadcast and diffused a grassroots match for the French Cup.
I mean, I think that this question of sponsorship strikes me something that's become really, really important, because when we talked about monetization, and I think it's probably reductive to think in terms of just revenue shares or just selling your rights, because increasingly it seems to me when I speak to rights holders, the real benefit is coming through sponsorship and these kind of partnership agreements. I mean, looking at the overall kind of income stream, I mean, I don't know, William, if you have a feel for this overall. If I'm a rights holder with a reasonably attractive property, putting stuff out on social media, should I be looking really to monetize that via sponsorship and other commercial agreements more than perhaps through these mechanisms that we've discussed before?
I think there's no one right answer. I mean, clearly for a lot of content, for a lot of sports properties, getting a rev share from YouTube for their content is a very good way to get some value in. But for others, they will be thinking completely differently about it. So someone like, say, Bleacher Report is going down the route more of kind of branded content. So they'll have a direct relationship with a brand. They'll produce some content for social distribution using that, and that is what they're looking to do. They're looking to monetize directly with a brand for the stuff they put out. So I don't think we're anywhere near a point at which there is one or even two or three right ways of doing it. Everybody's feeling their way. There are all sorts of different opportunities. It matters dramatically what sort of content you have and who you're trying to reach. I think the only thing that one can try to say sensible about this is that it is quite important that if you own the content in the first place or own the property, you do have in mind what kind of outcome you want from it. I'm not sure that in every case the property owner is entirely clear about what outcome they want and how they will measure whether they've achieved that outcome. So I think people just need to look forward a little bit to the range of inventory they have, and these are all ingredients for telling stories. So what stories can I tell? Who are my commercial partners, or is this just an ad revenue share type opportunity? Is it purely for marketing? Are we trying to hit a particular territory or demographic that we feel we're weak in, or that feel there's an opportunity in? I just think you need to be clear about your opportunity, look at what you have at your disposal in terms of content, and then map your way through the range of social options available.
I mean, I think you touched on the idea of targeting then. It seems to me clearly that's one of the real benefits of these new technologies. And a lot of the partnerships, the value these days is as much in the data that you get back as the revenues. I mean, Christoph, is it possible I know there are so many levels of data that you provide to your partners that we could probably be here for the rest of the afternoon talking about it. But can you just give us a run through of the key kind of things that you would feed back to somebody about their users on your platform?
Does anyone here use YouTube and have a channel and use YouTube Analytics? Do you have a show of hands? Anyone? All right, a couple of. So the main tool for someone who runs a channel on YouTube would get, regardless of whether you have one subscriber or millions, it's the same tool. We give the same data out. It won't tell much if you've got one subscriber, obviously, but we hand out viewership information, when it was viewed, how it was viewed, on which device it was viewed, how long it was viewed, when did the user disengage, even retention graphs on a single video. I mean, there's tons of data. Obviously, we also report on the advertising. So we would give you what kind of ad formats would we serve against the content, in which countries, all kinds of data. I mean, I think providing a training for a partner on YouTube Analytics would probably take half a day. It's very rich. What we've then added over the time is also the subscription piece, because in some countries we've launched YouTube Red, our subscription offering. So we would also report those revenues back to them based on watch time. And then in some instances, like some of you might have heard that BT decided to live stream the Champions League and the Europa League final on YouTube. Was it end of May, I think? Yeah. in that case, they also did an advertising buy against the audience, and what the data they got back was basically a targeting list or a remarketing list of roughly 4 million people in the UK who watched the game, they could then target very specifically after the game with their subscription offerings and trying to convert them into paid subscribers of BT, which obviously on top of all the viewership data and the regular stuff that any partner would get is of tremendous value to BT in that case.
Is that based on cookie technology or email addresses? So it's cookies?
Yeah.
Primarily.
I mean, email addresses, I don't know about you, but I think, to be honest, when we talk about owning fan relationships, I don't think that email addresses are very meaningful. I've got an email address just to sign up for online stuff that I never check. Most people would have that. So it's not really meaningful to have that email address, to be honest.
Okay. But is it also the case that there is no data that you produce that you don't share? Because I think there are platforms that produce a lot of data which don't share. I mean, is that the case?
I wouldn't go that far because, to be honest, people who sign up and have a user account in YouTube, they don't want to share everything with the people, with the content creators and providers. They consume and watch on a regular basis. So there are limits in terms of confidentiality. We wouldn't hand out email addresses or personal information, but to be honest, there's so much internet technology these days that you can target those people regardless of having email addresses. So it's not that meaningful.
And also, from a rights holder perspective, obviously you work with different social media platforms. Do you feel that you're getting back, either in terms of revenues or in terms of data, do you think you're getting back what you need? Do you think you're getting a fair deal?
Don't look at me.
You don't? Christoph isn't here. Just pretend Christoph isn't here.
For example, we didn't choose to go in. We didn't choose a revenue share model because it's not enough for us, maybe, and we earn more money with sponsorship. About data, for sure, we would prefer to have more data and more cookie thing. I mean, a right holder like us need to have the data to propose other services or other offer like match tickets or merchandising products or things like that. And maybe we have to find a win-win model. I'm not sure we have enough to make good communication or good promotion with our other services. Yeah, so the reach is really good. Yeah, we have a lot of fans, but not sure we have enough data.
I mean, Gareth, looking obviously across all of the different platforms which exist, there are so many nowadays. I mean, overall, do you think sports bodies, sports rights holders are getting back what they need generally? I mean, there is a huge variation, from YouTube, and I've heard anecdotally that there are platforms which give you virtually nothing. Do you feel sports getting what it should be getting its due reward in terms of data rather than money at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think that it's definitely a challenge for some. It's quite clear that some of the social platforms don't share as much data, certainly on a per user basis as others, and it's definitely less data than you would get as a rights holder than those individuals being registered or active on your owned and operated platforms, your websites, your mobile apps. But I think you've also got to consider the trade-off in data versus reach and engagement, and of course the potential monetary streams that come from that. I mean, I think the bigger issue still is the huge disparity between the traditional TV and broadcast deals and any digital revenue stream that you talk of. I think that is in sports and in television more broadly still the much bigger issue. You've seen that transition happen in music. That streaming is now the driver of the industry from a revenue perspective. So it's quite clear that it can exist as the primary driver of value. But I think that the data. To me, the data question is sometimes is almost focused on too much, in the sense that our belief certainly is that as a rights holder, as a content owner today, you're competing for attention. You're competing to make sure that your content is relevant to the audience that want to see it, an increasingly global audience at that. And you need to work collaboratively with the platforms like YouTube who are out there, and Facebook and Twitter and others who will help you get to that audience. And actually, I think if you believe that you will exist entirely on an owned or operated basis for the future, is going to be tough, because you're you're talking about an audience which spends time on a multitude of devices, on a multitude of platforms, which changes throughout the day. And I think that our view is certainly that you need to be active on these platforms to make sure that you are relevant. Does that mean that you put all of your best content onto Facebook or YouTube? Probably not. But you do need to think about what's the right way of engaging that audience to make sure that you stay relevant.
I mean, William, is there a future? I mean, I think these questions about, one of the key questions, I think, for any rights holder when it comes to content is, do I use my own channels? Do I use my own website? Do I use my own IPTV channel? Or do I go for the reach of the immediate reach that the social platforms can offer? I mean, there are costs associated with running and storing and live streaming content. And one of the benefits, immediate benefits of going on YouTube or Facebook is that they swallow those costs for you. I mean, do you think there is a future for the official website as a vehicle, as a platform for rich content? Or do you think websites, the official league or federation website will eventually become just a kind of service provider?
Not really. I don't think there's much of a. It's not. I don't think official websites are going to disappear. But really, I mean, I don't think official websites are much used. I mean, they can have great content on them. You can use social sometimes to bring people back to the website, but I'm not sure that we live in that world anymore where I mean, I remember it. I mean, I helped rights owners craft very carefully structured licensing deals which would ensure that the content couldn't leave their website. But why keep, if you want people to see it, why keep it on your own website? Get it out there. The only thing holding that back in some cases are legacy media licensing deals, which and also sometimes it's the relationship between the club and the league or the federation. Some of those things can hold it back, but generally speaking, I think you should get it out there.
I mean, we've seen a number of examples of sports federations who use multiple social platforms. Quite a lot of people live stream simultaneously on YouTube, on Facebook. I mean, are we heading towards, with social platforms in particular, is there a stronger argument for being non-exclusive, for basically being completely promiscuous and putting your stuff out there? I mean, from maybe Francois, a rights holder perspective, does it make sense to deal with everybody in that sphere, or do you want to? Is there a logic for targeting certain platforms?
We are working with a lot of platforms, for sure. It's not the same audience, it's not the same consumption. YouTube is perfect to tell stories, and people don't switch, and they will see a lot of content, large stories. With Facebook, we don't have the same issues, and we'll maybe have more reach, but it's only short-form programs. Or technical tricks. So I don't know, will those platforms pay later, and maybe the deals will change, but maybe I'm not the best person to say that.
I mean, Christoph, in terms of live streaming, obviously it's a real big growth area, and we've seen a lot of big stories in the last 12 months about deals being done, rights fees being paid by people like Twitter for the NFL. From a technical perspective, I mean, I keep hearing that there is still an issue with quality on live streaming if you get a certain number of people logging on at the same time. I mean, do you feel that is still an issue? Do you feel that you've completely cracked that, regardless of the number of people who log on to YouTube to watch a live sports event, they're going to get a perfect, pristine, broadcast quality product?
I wouldn't say there's always a physical limit, right? And that physical limit at the moment is defined by the internet's capacity or the backbone. I mean, we run probably the biggest IP network in the world, and we've got a lot of redundancy. Our infrastructure is very big. And we've done, I mean, that was 3 years ago when Felix Baumgartner jumped out of the little capsule. There were 50 million people watching the live stream, 8.3 million peak concurrence. And that was 3 years ago. I think our infrastructure has more than doubled since. But if you want to do the World Cup live over the internet, I don't think that's physically possible, right? And that is not a question of YouTube versus Facebook versus anyone else. It's just the limit of fiber in the ground is just far, would be far exceeded. So, but in terms of the streams that we have and the audience that that we attract to those streams. I think that there is not really a physical limit. I mean, we've done. I was a couple of months ago. I was in San Bruno, our headquarters, and I was in the live operations room of some of the guys that runs the bigger streams, and he had like 6 or 7 screens in front of him, and I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Yeah, I was eating a salad or something." And there were like, I think at the same time, 15 or 20 live streams with more than 500,000 peak concurrents running on the infrastructure, and he was eating a salad. So I don't think that he was really sweating with those kind of numbers. I've heard from partners, that I haven't experienced it, that some of the other platforms are still having some infrastructure challenges when it comes to scalability. But to be fair, they've only started live streaming a year or 2 ago. I think we've live streamed the Olympics in 65 countries 4 years ago. So we have some experience. We've built out the infrastructure, and I don't think that anyone would say that YouTube's infrastructure is struggling with the kind of everyday use that we've been seeing.
I mean, in terms of how these questions will play out as far as the rights market is concerned, William, I mean, at the moment it looks as though a FIFA or a Premier League would not consider at the moment doing a single global deal with a tech company or a social media company. Is that, do you think, for technical reasons, or that they can just still get a greater premium by going market by market with traditional broadcasters?
I think most rights owners will take whoever pays the most. I mean, obviously, they have to be, relatively reliable and, pass various sort of beauty tests. But it's all down to who pays the most. But I think that is when we're really talking about the crown jewel assets and the large quantities of live content. And that takes us more down to the subject of OTT for live streaming, which obviously as we've seen with Twitter and the NFL is connected to social platforms, but I certainly don't think at least in Europe we're that close yet for the biggest properties. But I think I don't think anybody knows exactly what to what to expect with any of these things. But I think we can see it with respect to some of the other aspects of content going onto social. I think some rights owners are a little bit too quick just to suck in any money that's going, rather than, particularly with some of their short form content, think about, as I said earlier, what outcome they really want from it. And your question about whether to go exclusive or non-exclusive for a social platform, I think it really depends who you're trying to reach with what kind of content for what purpose. Because each of them has its own characteristics and can give you different things. So I think you've got to take a quite holistic, joined-up approach to the way in which you deploy your content.
I mean, Gareth, I think one of the issues for creating value in the digital sphere, and one of the reasons perhaps why the dollars haven't migrated as quickly as user habits have migrated to mobile and digital, lies around that whole question of the analytics and the metrics, and the fact that a view on YouTube is different from a view on Facebook. Do you think that from the kind of the conversations you've had with brands, with sponsors, with advertisers, that there is trust in the information which is coming back? I mean, it strikes me that one possible reason why a lot of these tech companies and social companies are not paying huge rights fees is that maybe they don't really have great trust in the numbers they're seeing in terms of reach and engagement.
I don't think it's necessarily a lack of trust in the numbers. There's clearly a lack of standardization. You're right to say that. There are different ways that content and viewing is measured, platform by platform. There are some consistent measures, things like watch time that Christoph talked about before is a fairly consistent measure, and it's relatively easy to compare that platform by platform. You could probably ask similar challenges with the true accurate global measurement of television. There are, obviously there's lots of assumptions in what those numbers are, so you're never going to get a perfect measure. I think that there's two things that we really think about in this space. One is there's a traditional business model set up around television, big aggregated audiences that come to watch on a single platform, on sport certainly, large events, and that's very attractive to advertisers. The Super Bowl, being a World Cup, etc., being Olympics, being pinnacles of those. But I think that as you move into an OTT and a digital environment, you've got to think about two things. One, is the business model of ad-funded content, does that stand up to the needs, to the scale that you would need for a Premier League or Olympics, etc., is one question. And then two, when you look at the subscription products, the OTT products, whether that's direct to consumer from an NBA or a UFC, etc., or it's a third-party OTT product like a DAZN from Perform, these are, they are replicating a model which is much more similar to television in the way that, i.e., it's a subscription paid-for product. The difference is you haven't got that installed base of distribution that you have with TV. So I don't think the change is coming quickly, but what we are seeing is the speed of that change is much faster than people expected. I mean, we work with the Caribbean Premier League and streamed 34 of their games live around the world to, 40 markets this year. Now, 2 years ago, if you'd said that a federation would be taking all of their 40 games live on Facebook, people would have thought you were mad. I think we'll very quickly see, and we're certainly seeing with some of our conversations now, people doing Facebook only or YouTube only deals, that they won't have any broadcast distribution at all. And I think if you're a tier 2 rights holder, I think that's something you do need to look at. You get free distribution, you get an audience you can target, you can specifically find fans of your sport in a way which is much, much harder to do if you are going through the traditional distribution channels. So I think we're at the very early stages of this journey, to be honest, and I think it's way too early to make a call about what this looks like. What is clear, though, I think going back to your earlier point about should you be on one platform or the other platform, you need to look where your audience is. If your audience is spending time on a multiple platforms and different types of devices, then your content probably needs to be there too. Then it's just getting the balance right to extract both the reach and the engagement that you want, but also protecting the monetary value that you need for those rights.
Can I just say, I think in a way, for at least one portion of this content that's going on social, I think the elephant in the room are the brands. Because I think a lot of rights owners, certainly including tier 2 rights owners, who would certainly welcome the opportunity to take their content, including live content, out to a social audience, but would probably like a brand to come with them and effectively monetize them, because if it's not going to be offered on a subscription basis, sure, the ad revenue share may be very welcome, but you're probably also looking for somebody to come in and partner with you and really make something of this from a brand perspective. And I'm not sure, and there's some very positive exceptions to this, but I'm not sure the brand community has really done enough or woken up enough to this opportunity, or has the right models to know how to engage in this. But and I think my personal view is that some of the conservatism that is holding us back a little bit is coming from the brands who aren't doing quite enough to engage with this and really leverage it. Because there's a lot of content out there that can be delivered socially where they're not going to be cannibalizing TV revenue. And I think rights owners are just looking for something to convince them to take that route, and it's got to be through some brand monetization.
Conversely, I just would say very quickly that on the flip side, I think that the brands are looking for content. I think there is increasing demand for content from brands because they have their own channels that they need to operate, and therefore this demand for having access to content, whether it's related to sponsorship or not, I think has increased a lot over the last couple of years.
I mean, you've got some brands on YouTube which are traditional sponsors, but which have got massive followings, and they're showing sports content, almost like a sports channel.
Yeah, I was going to say in reaction to his statement, I tend to disagree to some extent. If you look at what some of the bigger brands are doing, I think we also talked about the website and whether there's intrinsic value in having a website versus social media presence. I mean, traditionally, websites, like for any federation or club, whatever, was a platform, right? It was a platform for a sponsor to activate in a very traditional and conventional sense of banner ads and whatever. And you can win prizes and whatnot. That's all meaningless in today's world. But those websites were platforms. And I think that the brands at some point disengaged when those websites lost their mojo a little bit, to put it like that. And they're going elsewhere because the conversation happens elsewhere. And sponsors have understood that very, very early. If you look at some of the things that Adidas is doing or Nike is doing, Under Armour is doing, I mean, it's not like they're waiting for a federation or a club to develop a platform that they can care about again they're creating their own content, right? I mean, in most cases, Adidas would have better access to the players at Bayern Munich than the media team at Bayern Munich, right? Because there are testimonials on the ground for them. So they would just invite their own testimonials and shoot their own content and come up with their own brand collaborations on platforms like YouTube and others. They're not waiting for the federation to get ready with their own website. So I would say that brands are into the game, but they're not waiting for the federations or the official content. They're actually, defining their own rules, and they're creating their own content. And Adidas is one of the biggest football channels on YouTube, and it's a brand we're talking about. We're not talking about a club or a federation or anything like that.
How many people is that?
It's like roughly 1 million subscribers. And I mean, in terms of views, I mean, some of the advertising, it's also something I want to say earlier. Even the content genres blend, right? I mean, if you look at Super Bowl ads, most people of us would look at that content as content as such and not as advertising, right? So people voluntarily sit there and watch that content because it's more entertaining than the actual training content from the NFL, right? Let's be honest. So to some degree, brands have understood that game very early on, and they're not waiting for anyone else to come along. And that's something that we clearly see on YouTube. So brands use the organic reach they have with the content they organically can get on a platform like ours, and they're very successful with that. And then, of course, they would partner with FIFA, IOC, and others on the platforms that they've created, plus they will also go for the content. You will also hear from a lot of sponsors that they would like to have access to near-to-live clips and highlights and official match footage. They can also use that to own the real-time conversation around a particular event like the World Cup. Of course, if someone scores a goal, of course Adidas wants to show that if it's an Adidas player, but that's not the whole story that Adidas wants to tell about the World Cup, right?
I mean, we've talked a lot about social media in isolation. I'd like to finish with one question, which takes things a bit wider and a little bit of crystal ball gazing, and then we'll probably have time for one or two questions from the floor. If we look at social media as being one of a number of things which are happening at the moment, which are emblematic of the way the industry is developing, the rollout of OTT, the massive switch to mobile consumption, the huge increase in the personalization of messages through the data analytics, seems to me that a lot of these things add up to something which potentially could be fairly revolutionary in the way the industry works, rather than just a gradual, slow evolution, possibly having the same impact as the growth of pay TV in the 90s or the original arrival of broadband. I mean, taking all these things together and looking forward 3 or 5 years, I mean, we'll start with you, William. I know it's difficult to give a simple answer on this, but are there some things that you see, is there any kind of areas where you see a big shift coming up on the horizon?
I think most areas will see a fairly big shift, actually. I think we're into kind of uncharted territory here. I think we're entering a period of huge uncertainty and potential volatility for some of the the established industry models to change. OTT will start to represent a real threat to the pay TV business model or the traditional pay TV business model, and I think social platforms will continue to, take a lot of attention away from, the traditional places where people have put their sport and their other forms of content. So I think the key thing is that it's becoming harder and harder to keep people's attention. And people can paint sort of dystopian pictures of that and say, what's happening to the world. But it's a reality. And so I think the real battle is for attention. And so people have to use the tools we increasingly have to work out how they do that in a way that ultimately comes back to them feeding the money machine that is sport. Because ultimately all the properties need more and more money, or to at least keep the same money, to throw back into their events. And all I can predict is that we're going to see a lot of change.
Gareth, I mean, are these things a threat to the traditional business models of pay television, of advertising models, that social media, OTT?
I think that the way that we think about it internally at Grabio is that we're going to get to a position where we stop talking about the primacy of a screen and we start talking about screens. So the major change that we see is that the value will be in content and the rights, rather than the particular platform that they're distributed on. So there has been this you even look at the way that rights deals are done, we still talk about TV or linear broadcast deals, that this is sort of the defining and most valuable part of the industry, and they still are. But when you actually talk to a fan or the audience about what's the most valuable experience that you have, the valuable experience is probably the experience they're having right now on whatever screen that might be. And I think that when you change the definition about this idea that television is something to put on a wall, and you think about it that it's basically a content experience delivered to a screen, then the definition about what's important starts to change. And I think that will happen. So that will be the really major shift over the next 3 to 5 years.
Also, for the Federation's perspective, are there any areas where you're looking at changing radically the way that you construct your ITTs or the way that you have relationships with sponsors?
Yeah. Like I said in the beginning, for sure, for a right holder like us, thanks to social media platforms, we are not only a social media anymore. I mean, we are a strong brand and we are a media. For example, Nike invited last year in New York for the big convention for French media, which were L'Équipe, GQ, Le Monde, and FFF. Because we have a strong audience, and our sponsor see us like that now. So I think we have to think like a media, to produce a lot of content, and even if it's on Facebook, on YouTube, on Amazon maybe tomorrow, it's a different perspective for sure, and we will sell sponsorship differently. We will talk to social platforms for revenue share differently. We have a lot of work on those issues, and it will be really interesting. But for example, in our last Repucom study and report, the visibility of our sponsors on our social media platform represent today 25% of the total valorization of their visibility. I mean, on shirts, on boards. So it's far from the TV valorization, but it's more than the newspaper valorization, for example. And it's getting higher and higher. So let's see.
And how do you see your relationship changing with sport, if at all, in the coming 3 to 5 years?
I can always get better. I think, at the moment, I think we have very good relationships with most people in the industry, and that's for a number of reasons. I mean, we've been around for quite some time now, even though time moves quickly, but we've been partnering with people for many, many years. I see, in terms of the statements that we've heard, what I'm very curious to see is what kind of value virtual reality will actually drive in terms of consuming sport and having more immersive experiences. That's something that I'm really keen to dig deeper into. I mean, we have our own idea about it, but others have too. But that will change, I think, some of the distribution models quite significantly. If you think about physical versus virtual tickets and those kind of things. So I think the sport experience itself, as the technology evolves, will change, and therefore our partnerships will change, because the rights models might come differently in a couple of years' time if you have those kind of immersive distribution mechanisms, and therefore our relationships have to adapt. And the brands, to be honest, at the moment I see brands a little bit ahead of the, let's say, the organized world of sport, to be honest. I think they're doing a lot of things right, and it's always good to watch what they're doing. We can learn a lot from them, and they're certainly the ones that kind of feed into our platform because they drive the revenue machine that YouTube and Google have. So I expect a lot of innovation coming from the brand side, maybe even more than from the traditional sports industry, to be honest.
Unfortunately, we've run a little bit over, and there's another session on immediately after this, so I'm not going to have time to have any questions from the floor. So if I'd just like to say a big round of applause to our panel, to William, to Gareth, to Francois, and to Christophe. Thank you very much.